And it's the hardest thing you could ever imagine happening, and I think there's still a lot of shock and disbelief and a lot of anger and sadness. It's just every emotion flooded in.
The poor girlfriend of Christopher Lane, the young man from Australia murdered in Oklahoma because the alleged killers were bored. This horrific crime is shocking the world. There's many talking about the gun violence in America, something my next guest knows a lot about, perhaps more than most actually in America right now. New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, who joins me. Commissioner Kelly, welcome to you, and congratulations, first of all, on the largest gun bust in New York City's history, 254 illegal guns that you seized this week. I want to come to that a bit later, but I want to start with these two appalling gun incidents in America. The first, this young Australian student over here in America to play baseball, who was just apparently randomly targeted by bored teenagers in Oklahoma and gunned to his death. What is your reaction to that story?
Well, it's horrific, no question about it, and I think it just underscores the fact that there's way too many guns abroad in America. We have as many as 300 million guns in this country, and it's just an incredible number. And unfortunately, you're going to see events like this take place when you have that number of weapons. We think that we're in need of sensible gun laws, federal laws. The case that you mentioned in New York, I'm never going to talk about it, but it cries out for federal gun trafficking laws. We simply don't have that. It also cries out for background, universal background checks on people who want to get guns. I mean, this is common sense, but it doesn't look like either of these things are going to happen in the near term.
This other incident was in Decatur, this Georgia school, where a 28-year-old suspect, Michael Brandon Hill, he apparently had 500 rounds of ammunition and an AK-47. His brother says he's bipolar. He'd had previous dealings with authorities who thought that he was a risk. Again, an accident just waiting to boil over, a bit like Adam Lanza before Sandy Hook. How do you tackle this stream of disenfranchised, disaffected, perhaps deranged young, they're usually white males, who commit these mass shootings or have the intent to commit them?
It's very, very difficult to do it. We need databases with a more reliable, current information about the individual's mental state. Now, this person, we're not certain if it was his gun or he got a gun from an acquaintance. So if that was the case, it'd be even more difficult to check. But again, it just goes back to the idea that we have way too many guns in America.
Yesterday I interviewed a top Australian politician. He'd been the Deputy Prime Minister under John Howard back in the 90s. And after they had a huge atrocity there in the mid-90s, they brought in very stringent gun control. And as he said, taking guns off the streets, banning certain types of assault weapons has had a materially beneficial effect to reducing gun crime. But trying to win that argument in America is almost impossible at the moment. Why is that?
Well, I think there's a lot of polarization here, and people in big cities, certainly New York being the biggest, have perhaps a different idea of guns and gun control, the need for gun control, than people in other parts of the country, more rural parts of America. I mean, I think there is a legitimate debate in some of these areas, but I can tell you that in New York City and other cities in America, we are being plagued with the proliferation of guns.
You seized 254 illegal guns, as I said, a lot of it through identifying and investigating social media postings, people brazenly putting up pictures on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and so on. Is that a new prong in your attack?
Well, sure. We have to keep up with the times, and clearly social media is being used to exchange information, actually to show pictures of guns that were for sale. There's a lot of law enforcement agencies involved in this case, and I particularly want to thank the Sanford, North Carolina Police and the Rock Hill, South Carolina Police for their assistance in this investigation. As you said, this was the largest seizure that we've had. It was done through the really outstanding work of one undercover police officer who was able to make all of these purchases from two independent networks. So it sort of underscores the the flow of what we call the iron pipeline up I-95 from states in the South into New York City. 90% of the guns that we confiscate on the streets of New York are coming from out of state. And this is obviously a classic example of that.
Right, I mean, the other example is that in Chicago, which is often quoted as a disaster when it comes to guns, despite having reasonably tough gun control, and I use that phrase advisedly, but if you study the guns that are seized by police in Chicago, I think well over 50% of those come from out of Chicago. And it seems to me that no one's also debating at the moment the possibility of just having federal gun control laws. I mean, wouldn't that make life easier for everyone in your kind of position, a city police chief, just have the same rule in every state related to guns?
Absolutely. Of course it would. But as I say, I think certainly in the near term, that's unlikely. So in this case, here we have guns coming through several states from North Carolina and South Carolina, yet these individuals are being prosecuted under state conspiracy laws, state gun possession laws, and it makes the prosecution itself much more challenging.
How is it that so many people in America do not share your view of the danger of guns? What is it about the gun itself, the culture of gun ownership, perhaps, which makes it so difficult to have this kind of sensible view of guns around the nation?
Well, I think a lot of people simply are not affected by guns. People in urban areas are, and quite frankly, in communities of color, for the most part. In New York City, 97% of the people shot in our city are either black or Latino, and it's concentrated in our major cities. So if you don't live in a major city, if you don't live in one of those neighborhoods, it's something that you might read about in the newspaper, but you're not personally affected by it. We're saving lives in New York City. We're doing it proactively, but obviously not everybody is happy with some of our tactics and strategies.
I mean, you touched there on stop and frisk, a very contentious issue. Do you accept that stop and frisk is deliberate racial profiling, but for a purpose that is, in your eyes, worth doing and successful?
No, it's certainly not racial profiling. It's simply something that we reject. We're appealing the judge's decision. It was made on what I would submit is very scant evidence. The judge herself found 10 of the 19 stops that were in question in this case acceptable as far as the constitutionality is concerned. We think the standard that was used in this case is flawed. We certainly don't accept the premise that racial profiling is going on in New York City. Again, when you look at the universe of people who are being shot and killed in New York, and you look at the people who are being arrested for it, and the criteria that we submit is the appropriate one to use, and that is the descriptions of the victims of violent crimes, the description of the perpetrators, then our stops comport with those descriptions.
Commissioner Ray Kelly, thank you, as always, for joining me. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Piers.